much, Dr. Mayura Deshpande, for the truly inspiring and insightful session. You have beautifully highlighted how collaboration and strategic partnerships shape the evolving landscape of medical affairs. Now we move on to our next topic for the day, trust by design, explainable, governed privacy, and first AI. We are joined by Dr. Pranab Pillai, the founder and CEO of Neuratrial, based in Singapore. With over 2 decades of experience in clinical research, biopharma operations, and digital innovation, Dr. Pillai has led large-scale global programs that bridge technology, data, and healthcare. Before founding Neuratrial, he spent more than 15 years at Covance. Now where he served as a head of APAC Biopharma Project Management, overseeing strategic planning and regional leadership across multiple therapeutic areas. His journey also includes impactful roles at Amgen, PharmaNet, and MQ Pharmaceuticals, where he honed his expertise in project leadership, operational excellence, and data-driven decision-making. Through his work, Dr. Pillai has been at the forefront of integrating ethical AI and explainable governance into clinical research, ensuring innovation remains transparent, secure, and centered on patients' trust. So before we begin, I inform everybody once again that we have a Q&A session after the speaker's note. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Pranab Pillai for his talk on Trust by Design, Explainable, Governed Privacy First AI. It's over to you, sir.
Thanks, Rachna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Hi, Pranab. Yes, we can hear
Perfect.
you.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and share my screen, right? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay,
Yes,
just
sir.
give me a second. Right. Let me know if you can see my screen.
It's still not there, Pranab.
Not there yet? Hold
Yeah.
on. Okay, I think it's coming up now.
Yes, we can see it. Please go ahead. All yours.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So thanks, everyone, and good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are. As mentioned, I'm CEO and founder of a company called Neuratrial-AI. My background, I'm a domain expert. I've worked within clinical research for 20 years now. I've lived most of that 20 years within clinical research in Singapore. I've worked with companies like Covance, LabCorp, before that with Amgen, PharmaNet, and kind of the idea of building AI came because AI worked really, really fast. And I thought, okay, why don't we build something that helps researchers and also essentially enterprises. So what I wanted to do is do something different. I think most of the time we do talk about what AI can do for us, right? I wanted to take a slightly different approach and say, can we really trust it? Meaning, are you able to explain what AI does? Then are there governance tools? Are there audits? Is it auditable? Is the data, the information that we exchange with some of these tools private? May that be as an individual or as organizations, right? So essentially what happens is why these things are important, and you will see in the slides later, is because we work in a highly regulated industry. May that be healthcare, clinical research, life sciences, or even finance. You can have a very clever assistant, but remember that sometimes the models we design are used to decide on eligibility in a clinical trial, for example, or whether funding needs to be provided in a research setting, and even from a regulatory inspection perspective. So the bar is much higher than maybe asking ChatGPT to write a poem for you, right? So that's very different. And in this presentation, I'm going to touch upon 3 broad topics. They're interrelated, but very different. Are the models that we use really explainable? And I'll get to what that is. Is it governed? Do we have proper auditing that happens for these tools? And is it really, really private? So those are the areas that I will run into. Now, if you have any questions, please do send in the chat. I won't be able to see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but I will take those questions in the end. So what generally happens today, right? So you have any models. Now, it may not just be a conversational AI or a chatbot. What it generally happens is the models are trained. There is some kind of ML process that is happening. And the machine learns to do certain things. As a user, you use it for anything, right? It could be a chatbot, it could be any other AI tool that you're using. But when you get an output, either a response or an output or a report, Do you know why the AI actually did it? Why did it choose option A versus option B? When do we know whether it's really succeeded? When do we know whether it really failed? Can we identify the failure? Then whether can we really trust it? Meaning whatever it's saying, can we really trust it? And if it has made a mistake, does it tell you that it has? And you have an option as a user to correct the errors. Now that's where most of the AI is today. Now, what explainable AI expects is, or the short form is XAI, as you can see on the screen, is you as a user need to understand why did the model do something the way it did. You need to understand why it did not do some of the other things. You also need to know when it has succeeded or when it has failed, and that increases your trust level. And when it has made a mistake, you can actually take corrective action. So that is the whole idea in terms of understanding AI. And sometimes it is easy to miss some of these things when we ourselves as end users use some of these models or tools, but these are critical, and I'll come to in the later slides as to why some of these are important. Now, when is explainability really not that important, right? So one of the things where I mentioned was writing a poem. If you ask ChatGPT to write a poem for you, you don't really want to know how it actually came up with that poem, right? Or if it recommends lists for you on your Netflix or on Spotify, you may really not want to know how it kind of came to that conclusion, right? Because that is not a high stakes task for you. You will see some random ads from Amazon these days, which are AI driven. It kind of uses AI in the backend to suggest or make recommendations for you. Your emails get filtered from your main inbox to maybe promotions, for example. AI somehow, or AI or machine learning is involved within some of those. Now, these are use cases where you don't really have serious or probability or possibility of serious harm. But there are other instances where it can cause harm. So for example, if you're using an AI to recommend a treatment for a cancer patient, and there are many different options. Now, why did the model actually choose the option that it did provide to the clinician or to the researcher versus the other option available? Why did an algorithm, an AI algorithm, say that this patient was or was not eligible to participate in a clinical trial? Or in a finance, for example, why was a loan rejected based on an AI tool? Or why did a self-driving car actually just suddenly brake in the middle of the traffic? Was there a reason why it did that, right? So these are cases where their lives are impacted, right? Directly, indirectly. So we need to have systems and tools which are governed and which have some level of explainability. And there are many layers of those, which I will come to in a bit. Now, in case of medical, healthcare, life sciences, this becomes a very critical thing. Now, think about a very simple use case, right? You open ChatGPT or you open Perplexity or you turn on Claude or Gemini or whatever. You go in and ask a question. It is essentially a black box, right? So you ask something, it generates a response for you. You generally did not know what happened in the background, meaning how did it really come to that response? You may have put in a few numbers in there and said, can you assess this for me and calculate this for me? And then it throws out something. It doesn't really, you can't really see what it is. So it's essentially a black box, and any black box environment can have issues in terms of trust, safety, legality, and some ethical problems. So explainability these days is not just a nice to have. You need to have that in your design. So you can't just simply try and explain to it later, but your design itself, as these AI models, they need to have it even in the planning stage. And explainability is not something that is the same for everyone. For example, an individual who's a developer will need a very different level of explainability compared to a clinician, for example, or a regulator. So they need different levels of explanations, and we need to tailor the explainability to these. And some of these core elements that are defined in terms of what the explainability looks like is who are you actually addressing the response to with the explainability? How do you link that to your decision? What type of explanation is required depending on the role or the profile of the user? Sometimes it's difficult to explain, right? Meaning you will have an accurate system. For example, if you are writing a research paper and you have referenced maybe over 100 articles, and you've pulled those 100 articles and you write a really, really nice research paper. And you ask an AI model, which is really good and been trained really well, it may probably access 50,000 papers, right? And then it tries to connect thoughts across these papers. So explainability is not easy, right? In some of these cases where some very large models are looking at millions of data sets, are trying to find out some type of correlation across these data points. But how do you balance that accuracy versus explainability? How do you prevent an automation bias? So people who keep using AI, they tend to kind of generally trust it, right? Meaning it's just that I use it every day. I've not been said that something I did was wrong. So there is a bias in my mind that, yes, whatever I'm getting is actually correct. So you have an automation bias. There are individual values, and how does it impact on patient-doctor autonomy? How do patients deal with it? How do doctors deal with it? So there are a lot of areas that we essentially need to consider when we are dealing with explainable AI. Now, going into these in a bit more detail, when you're explaining something, it has to be human understandable, right? So you can't throw up a bunch of formulas and explain, or a graph and say, hey, this is all it works. A simple graph, good enough, but a three-dimensional or a multi-dimensional graph where you start connecting these vectors and all those stuff and say how it's all connected, it's not something what explainability means. And you need to give that explanation to the individual according to their role, according to their relevance. You should be able to explain its competence. You should be able to explain its past actions, what the next steps and the current processes are, and how do you kind of put all those evidences and the inputs together. And all of these are essentially, most of these days are tailored towards professionals, right? It is not to end users like us, where we kind of take up a model and we get to know how exactly a certain thing happened. So you need to have tools that are sufficiently transparent and interpretable, and they have to be rule-based, right? So wherein you have systems that are able to explain. Now, in some cases, as I said, it may not be needed, but essentially the idea is you need to have transparency in how something has happened, how to interpret that something that has happened, and how do you explain those decisions. So those are important from a legal perspective, from ethics perspective, and from a basic human understanding perspective. Now, in terms of AI governance, now what generally happens, as I said, it's not an afterthought. It has to be in your design. So when you govern your AI, you need to ensure that you have proper governance in place. So your leadership from the CEO all the way down, you need to ensure that there are proper governance mechanisms of these models. How do you prevent bias of these models, all your tools? Like, for example, you throw out a model which is really, really good at maybe doing some drug discovery. Now, how do you ensure that someone does not end up making a biological weapon with it, right? So guardrailing, so governance and all. So those are some of the considerations which organizations need to take care of when they are building these tools. Building these tools these days, I'm telling you, it's not that difficult. What is difficult is to keep it in control, right? Meaning, how do you explain and ensure that people use it properly? You can give a knife to a baby and then they can hurt themselves, right? Or they can hurt others. But how do you ensure that you just give that knife to the right person, or the knife is intelligent enough to not hurt anyone around them? So that's the whole idea of governance. And how do you as an organization create these frameworks and ensure that you have the appropriate monitoring and auditing of your tools? Now, then the other element is the privacy. So we've covered explainability, we've covered governance and privacy. Now, in terms of privacy, what does actually mean? See, I think this was the first thing. Privacy was the first thing that actually changed the whole conversation about AI, where you've seen the very early versions of ChatGPT, where some companies' data were thrown off to other users as potential examples, right? So where data was used by these tools for training the models, and they ended up showing on other users' responses. This has changed significantly with most of the advanced models these days. But how do you ensure that the data is private? 3 or 4 months ago, or even 6 months ago, it was very easy to go to have a tool that would go to an internet site and scrape the data. So scrape meaning just go and collect the data from it and put it into their training models to be used later, or real-time scraping. But when you do that, are you allowed to actually go to that site? Meaning you can go to a regulatory site. Regulators allow you to take the data because it is out for the public and it is not associated with certain limits. But are you really allowed, right? So one of the examples that came up recently was we were trying to talk to one of a biotech companies, and they wanted to develop some kind of tool for biomarkers using AI. Now, there are a lot of biomarker databases available out there, but we couldn't technically kind of use it and train the model because they are very clear that these models have to be used for individuals and not for organizations. So how do you check what your data is? How do you ensure that your data is not copyright protected and you are not just picking up data, right? That is from a data perspective. Same from a user perspective. What are you doing with the user data? Where does it sit? You say that it sits in a log for, say, a certain number of days, but what does it actually mean? Do the users really know that their data is being kept? Do you have an access to go and request deletion of the data? In some instances, legally, they may want to keep the data because someone might have misused a model, right, by generating content that was not allowed. Like, as I said, in this case, they may ask for maybe a weapon generation, right, which we don't really want. Or maybe someone has asked something to harm themselves or maybe the others. So in instances like that, there has to be data stored, but is it something that is explained to the user upfront? So these are some of the things in terms of data privacy that are important for everyone to consider. Now, there are many organizations or regulators who have come with AI regulations. FDA has it, EU has it. So I'm going to take EU as just a benchmark and explain to you what regulators think about these three concepts of explainability, governance, and privacy. So what regulators say is that AI should be understandable, right? So any high risk AI. So high risk AI is anything that we do within our domain, right? From a healthcare life sciences perspective, it is categorized as a high risk domain. So all these models are or should be understandable to the user. It needs to have a clear instruction on the purpose. What are the limits of those models? What kind of data it is? And then how do you interpret the outputs, right? And within all of these for high-risk AI that are used within our domain, we need to have appropriate human oversight, and it's mandatory as per these regulations. So you can't just build a model and then use it within your domain and say that there was no human oversight, right? Because once you get audited and inspected, these are some of the checklist items that the regulators are going to come and ask you. Not you, probably your user of your tools, as to how did you actually come to a conclusion the way you did, right? And then how do you ensure that these models prevent any risk to health or safety or basic fundamental rights of individuals? For example, if there is a bias in a clinical trial patient matching system, it would be harmful for the patients who are actually not selected to be participating in a clinical trial. Now, how do we ensure that these systems, even if they're running, there are issues, you can stop it? So then comes the idea of qualified transparency, meaning who sees what in terms of explainability. So that is also something that the EU AI Act clearly mentions. Now, the same thing in terms of privacy. High-risk AI should be high quality, it should be relevant and representative. So when you have a training data or you use data to train your models, did you use representative data? Because see, most of the time, what people have been doing in the past is they just use the data that is available. No one actually went to the extent of saying, is this data representable and will our model be generally representable to the population that we are serving, right? So the training, validation, and test data sets. So people have been just using what is available, saying that, okay, there is nothing else available. But how do you then ensure that your model meets all of these regulations is what the regulators are now asking us to do. And they all sit on top of the existing GDPR style principles. And now they are also asking that we keep logs for at least 6 months to ensure that we track any misuse or rights violation or by these AI tools. The same thing in terms of the governance, meaning we need to have, so from a governance perspective, the EU Act classifies certain uses as banned. So a very simple thing that they use is like you cannot use an AI tool to decide whether you should select a candidate or not select a candidate from a jobs perspective, right? Meaning someone has applied for a job and you have these AI tools. Unless there is clear explainability in terms of how those models work, you can't just have a black box wherein you put in a bunch of CVs and the output is the 5 top people that you should consider, because you really don't know how those evaluations happened. So if you're building something like that, you need to have something clearly explainable. But EU has You can kind of read the regulations, but there are some use cases where the EU has banned the use of AI. The high-risk categories are healthcare, biometrics, employment, critical services. These are considered high risk, so you need to follow the requirements of high risk. And then there are limited risk, transparency, and minimal risk categories where you have a bit of kind of flexibility to use the model the way you want to. So you need to have a good auditing, quality management, risk management system. All of us are quite familiar with this within our industry, but from an AI perspective, regulators want us to do that as well. Now, what they essentially want, if I have to put it very simply, is whatever tool that we provide as organizations to the users, to enterprises, it should be explainable to the user. It should be private by design, and it has to have governance and auditability across the life cycle of from the very beginning, where you actually select your training data set, until the moment you get an output. Everything in between needs to have governance, explainability, and privacy built into it. Now, when we as organizations build things, we have to take all of that into consideration. So we can't just simply build something and just send it out there without knowing that there is no privacy, there is no governance, there is no accountability, our models are not fair, or there is security lapses in terms of how the data is being used or the data that is being used to train the models. So this becomes kind of an additional duty of care for enterprises and organizations when we build and take these tools to our customers. Now, what do we generally need to do in terms of these AI models, right? Meaning, what do companies do from explainability, governance, and privacy perspective? So as I said, we need to be very clear that our models are, like, we acquire our training data appropriately. There are evaluations that are performed regularly. There are organizations who will build a model, but they will never evaluate it. Meaning, does it do the right thing? Does it not do the right thing? They just build it and kind of, because they're all in a hurry to catch up, right? This whole race, they just build and then kind of, I don't think a lot of them put their thought process into evaluations at all. They have, so at the very beginning itself, we need to have all these things in place. How are you going to use the data? How are you going to protect it? How do you ensure that there is transparency across the life cycle? Is there a feedback loop? So when you get a feedback from a user, do you actually take that feedback and make any changes, right? So that's explainability. The same thing with governance. You need to have that whole governance built into your development process. And also after that, to ensure that this whole thing is being managed properly. And the same with the copyrighted content, user data in terms of privacy. So these are all some of the stuff that organizations do these days. Now, what happens to us, right? So this is the last slide I think I have. So what is our part, right? So we as researchers or individuals who consume this AI or use it to do a number of things with the AI, sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly, we are generating something which sometimes we can't explain. So the question really isn't, can we build it, right, for organizations? It is about, can we actually defend it? What has been happening at every level. When I say defense, it's not just the output, it's at every level. Is it defensible? And when we as consumers use it, do we really understand if the AI we use is really private? Can it explain to me how it kind of has done certain things? And is it governed? Meaning, is there some level of governance that is built to these tools in the background? So this was a very heavy topic. I kind of tried to kind of put it into one 45-minute presentation, but I'm sure there is a lot that could be kind of spoken on presentation like this. But yeah, that was all that I had. And I want to kind of, well, let me stop sharing here. Go back to this slide so you can see folks. Yes, so these are like kind of a high level stuff. So feel free to jump in, ask any questions, and whatever you feel like. If you have any comment for the larger audience as well, please feel free to just add it in.
Thanks, Pranab, for the wonderful and engaging session. Hi, everyone. Please feel free to ask your questions, your doubts related to AI, anything about Pranab's journey, anything you want to know, please go ahead and ask.
Thanks, Richa.
Maybe I can ask Pranab. So what inspired you to be an entrepreneur now?
Yeah, it was it was interesting when I've always been a domain guy. I love technology. The other day someone was asking me, why did you start loving technology? I don't know why, but then every time something IT mishap used to happen, the IT guys used to send people my way because I somehow used to figure out as to how to figure out things. I used to kind of do a lot of experimentation. In fact, once when I was in my first company in Encore, I blew up a laptop, a desktop at that time, by pressing some buttons which shouldn't have been, and then it crashed. And the guy came and told me, "What did you do?" I said, "I was trying to figure out what happens if I do this." Right? I did not really know. I think internet at that time did not give you all of that information as AI does these days. But when I did that, because of for the personal reasons, I was in a break. So before my son joined his primary, I wanted to spend some time in UK for 1 year. I was there in Oxford. AI was picking up, and I was very, very interested. So I hired a bunch of IT teams and asked them to build something for me. And there was just an initial journey. I thought, if it doesn't work out, I don't have to be in there. But things turned out to be very, very interesting. Over that period of time, I started coding and understanding, trying to bridge the gap within the tech. And that's what inspired me to kind of say, hey, let's just start something which we can take to companies now, right? Not just to individual users, but to companies. So that's where it all kind of started. I'm kind of loving it.
Great. Wonderful. I mean, it reflects in the way you speak and everything, Pranab. It reflects that you are enjoying, in your body language, that you are enjoying this journey.
Thanks.
So great. We have questions coming up. Rachna, would you like to read them out to Pranab, please?
Yes, ma'am. Sakshi is asking, sir, do you think AI can help find adverse drug reactions in patient and dose calculations?
I would say it hasn't. So yeah, this question, Sakshi, has been asked, and I think there are a few organizations really, really working on it. So I'll give you one typical use case for adverse drug reactions and a dose calculation. So one of the things that I was exploring, digital twins. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with digital twins. So we were trying
read
to
them
see
about them today, Pranab. Sorry to interrupt. I took them in my session. So
Oh, you did? Okay.
yes.
Perfect.
Please go ahead.
So essentially, digital twins can be used to even get personalized levels of adverse drug reactions, ADR, AEs, SAEs, or whatever it is, right? You could potentially build a tool to get personalized level, but that's very expensive, compute heavy, because you need to build tools specifically for those patients, and you need to have very thorough data set. But even without that, you can find broad population-based ADRs if you are looking at ADRs across the data set. But again, as I said, the data has to be foolproof. If you have some data, like in the previous instances when people did not have data, they used to use synthetic data to plug the gaps. But that did not give you very high accuracy. So when you do your evaluations, you need to be absolutely sure what those, how did you actually come to those conclusions? But essentially, yes, you can build AI models to potentially look at adverse drug reaction. So the way the models would typically work is it would probably take in all your omics data, right? It'll probably take all of your medical data. It'll try and do correlation and say, hey, these set of patients can typically have a drug reaction to a drug with a MOA or a mechanism of action like this. So you are able to build models, but you need to be sure as to you factor in all of these things for you to get an accurate reaction. And the same thing in terms of patient dose calculation, right? So most of the time, dose calculation happens in general around the body weight. So most people have been doing that for a very long time, but you can have more personalized level of dose calculation by building more complicated and stronger algorithms that AI can look through millions of data points to actually accurately predict based on their liver condition, or if they have renal disease, or if they have a certain genetic makeup, right? If all of the data is in there, it should be able to predict some things. Again, this is all human in the loop. It gets you started. Because we're dealing with humans, you always need to ensure that it has gone through that human phase wherein a test has been done within the human phase, because just using a model will not be sufficient. Maybe in the future, we'll get to a state where every one of us will have a digital twin, and medicine will be tested on all of us before it's actually given to us, because then it'll say, hey, Pranab's going to have an adverse drug reaction for this particular medication, so maybe give him something else, right? And the same thing, maybe this dose doesn't fit Pranab. Maybe you need to give him a different dose. So yes, I think eventually we'll get there. For now, still in a very nascent stage because of the need to collect personalized data to make any such credible decisions.
Yes, sir. And we have a few more questions. Sabah Begum is asking, sir, how do we ensure that AI becomes more advanced? Clinicians still understand and trust its recommendations, rather than just follow them blindly? If you could just elaborate on this.
Yeah, this is a good question, Sabha. In terms of AI becoming advanced, right? So there are a few things how AI can become advanced. The first one, obviously, is the data that we use to put inside these AI models to make the correlations. The other one is the architecture of some of these models. Does it actually go in and understand the thing that is put in there? Now, one thing I can explain to you about AI, so far, there are, I think we're talking about AGI, but AI is, so if I have to explain to you how AI generally works, right? So I have, say, my medical records and I scan it into an AI system. The AI, what it does is it converts my scan into a text. The text is then sent through a process where it converted into numbers. So every text, so if, say, I have, say, atorvastatin, for example, it will convert atorvastatin into numbers. It splits atorvastatin into certain stuff, and then it converts it into number. And this number sits in a database somewhere within the model itself. Now, based on the input, atorvastatin can be picked up if there is a high probability, meaning these are all probabilistic models where it tries to make probabilities and say, hey, this is the highest probability for me to go in this sequence, right? So it goes in a sequence and then it gives you a response. So that is how it works. Now, there are reasoning models that have come in where the sequence is then tested by kind of testing its own thinking process. Right? Say, okay, I've said this, but is it really right? Right. So models have now become a little bit more advanced than what it used to be. So systems are much more reliable these days, but a lot could be done from a clinical standpoint. And in terms of the development itself, right? So there's a lot happening. Model architectures have changed significantly. So yes, AIs are slowly getting there, but the accountability still becomes important. So the question that someone kind of the other day we were having a meeting and someone asked, if I use AI and if I make a recommendation and if the patient falls sick, is the AI responsible? Is the company making AI responsible, or is the doctor responsible, right? So whose responsibility is it like where it is, right? So this is a very complicated question because any AI developer will say, it's your responsibility, doctor, because you should have checked it, right? Because I've told you that this doesn't have 100% accuracy. But the doctor said, you came to me and I said that this is a very robust model and it predicts something. So there are tensions around some of these things as to how these things work. But eventually, as we go along, the technology is becoming so good. There are some models which have recently gotten 100% on the USMLE exams, right? Meaning better than what students would generally get. So humans do make mistakes. AI, they say, will make less mistakes. But yes, it's kind of getting there in terms of the system recommendations or accountability. But then, yeah, with the governance coming in, regulators also jumping in to make people accountable for people who are building it and people who are using it, both at the same time. Yep. I hope that answers your question. Otherwise, please do send a follow-up. And then the other interesting aspect, right? I don't know whether you've recently, so there's a paper that kind of came up recently, maybe around 3 or 4 weeks ago. So what it did was it did a trial on doctors who were using AI. So it evaluated or scored them on their diagnostic ability at a baseline, gave them AI for 3 months, and then evaluated their diagnostic ability after 3 months. And I think it increased their diagnostic ability by 20%. They were able to improve their ability to diagnose diseases. Then they took away AI and then evaluated them again after 3 or 4 months. And their ability to diagnose actually went down from the very first baseline that they had because they were so reliant. So that is the automation bias I talked about. They were so reliant on AI that now they couldn't think without AI as a tool to make some of those decisions. So there are kind of pros and cons with some of these models as to how they've been used. But as humans, I think we kind of need to figure out how we will use them eventually. Are there any other that we have, Rachna?
Yes, sir. Can I read it for you, sir?
Yeah, sure.
Sir, from your perspective, what truly builds trust among clinicians and patients when it comes to AI-driven decision support? Is it transparency, performance, or governance, more importantly and precisely?
So I would say it's all, right? Probably more than what you have mentioned. So there is definitely need of governance. As I said, so when we build some of our tools, we try to kind of give the users every step of the backend process, meaning the user pressed this button, it triggered this action. We have multiple agents, and this agent was picked up because of this reason. The agent then picked up this document, provided a response, and then kind of did. So that's the governance that we're talking about. In terms of transparency, do they actually see that process? Yes, and that's where the reasoning models have come in, where the transparency have become slightly better. So if you go and click on that reasoning, you'll see the steps that the model has actually taken, right? So, and also, why did it not choose a certain decision? So when you read some of the transcripts that it has in the reasoning, you can see why did it choose one decision over the other. So I would essentially say all of these are critical and much more. So there are many other factors as well that needs to be considered here for anyone to kind of essentially use the system. Now, what happens is clinicians leave the burden of all of this to the developers, and clinicians want to know whether it is correct or can I use this model? But there are some who actually go in and question some of these things before they use these models. So I hope that makes sense.
Yes, sir. And we have a question from Akanksha. How AI-supported medical technologies are seen by regulatory authorities?
Yeah, so surprisingly, Akansha, regulators are seeing it in a much more positive light than what industry itself is seeing. We had gone at a meeting recently, and then there were a bunch of folks, they said AI is still not there. But if you open up some of the articles, you will see that, say, UK's MHRA has already started using AI in drug approvals. They have cut down approval time by 50%, that's what they say. FDA has released guidance documents for use of AI at all levels, from discovery to drug development. They have had these AI regulations come out. So regulators are very much on top of it. Regulators have accepted it. They know that this is the direction that it is going to go, right? And then regulators are more receptive than companies. I think the reason most of the companies don't adopt AI is because for everyone, it's a black box. They don't really understand where to start, right? Meaning a lot of them have heard about it, read about it. There are large companies who have spent millions, like I think Novo Nordisk or Lilly or Johnson & Johnson. Everyone's kind of putting in money in there, right? Meaning, so there are companies using it. So everyone's getting everyone excited as to there are these things happening. So there is a lot of FOMO out there. That's why they want to use AI. But regulators are kind of at their level, they've started implementing and using AI at different levels, but they're cautious in the way they do it. They're giving out guidances and all that stuff. But I personally feel their adoption is slightly more than the industry itself.
Yes, sir. And we have a few more questions. Mirza is asking which areas of pharmaceutical industry are more likely to be affected by AI automation, research, clinical trials, or data analysis?
So data was the first thing that started, because see, even before AI, machine learning was already doing a lot of stuff for data analysis. With the AI coming in, with the new AI models coming in, those ML tasks have become very easy, interpretable, and it was able to do much more, right? In terms of data itself. So these really heavy models these days have so much data and data points in there that data analysis becomes very easy for them. So data analysis was the first that already started. Clinical trials is already started at all the phases itself, right? So from protocol writing, there are tools available out there that can help you write protocols. There are tools available out there that can pressure test your protocols. There are tools available out there that can give you various versions of what your sample size calculation should be in a protocol. It will tell you the eligibility. It will go and score through millions of data points and kind of suggest, hey, this is what it is. Clinical trials, also patient matching. So you can match patients on clinical trials, right? So there are models that are available that run within hospital systems where you pull in data from the EMR, you look at the patient profile and match it against the inclusion exclusion of the sponsor and say, hey, this site has 5 ovarian cancer trial patients who actually meet protocol ABC criteria. So AI has actually gone into all of this already from a clinical trial perspective. The same with research. Pharma is spending billions of dollars in drug discovery. And most of the large pharmaceutical companies have had now, I think, signed partnerships with most large AI providers in drug discovery. So a lot of this has already started within drug discovery, clinical trials, or data analysis, and much more.
Yes, sir. And Anjali has a question. As students, how can we understand the safe limits of using AI in medicine so that it supports but doesn't replace human expertise?
Yeah, this is kind of critical, right? So I give an example of how someone used AI and then ended up just relying completely on AI. So it's like this, right? A few years ago, many years ago, people used to say you need to remember tables, right? Nowadays, I think students like with calculators, no one kind of thinks about tables anymore, right? The same thing with typing and dictating. See, I have given up typing for a very long time. I just simply dictate, right? So eventually, it is going to be voice enabled. So industry is changing, all of us are changing. So what will happen is this tool is always going to be there. There are some people who will use it and excel at it. There are some people who may just say, hey, this is going to kind of make my brain smaller, right? And then I won't be able to think. I think as individuals, we need to go in and evaluate ourselves as to how do we use it. We can still do a lot of things while using these tools, but you need to be careful as to how to use it. The first thing is before you use any AI tool in medicine, life sciences, healthcare, it is important for you to really research a bit more as to the background about these tools, how reliable they are. You can't generally easily get an answer. So whenever you can't get an answer, you always are on the side of caution where you try to be careful, really evaluate. So earlier when I used to use AI tools, simple chatbots, I would always go in and kind of copy and paste that in Google and try to get a relevant a research paper to kind of see whether it is true or not. And in those days, they always used to be wrong, right? They used to hallucinate, they used to make up things. So as students, you have to kind of be very careful. Don't just blindly trust what AI has given you. It will get to a stage where you will see that the trust will improve. But at this point in time, I would say you still have to evaluate everything that comes out of it and ensure that you're cross-checking it before you use it. And then what will happen is one side of your brain will probably become kind of less active compared to the others. Maybe you'll start developing something new. Maybe see, it's like using AI itself as a skill. Maybe one part of the brain will open up probably to use AI better, right? So I think that's where it will all go.
Yes, sir. And we have one last question. To what extent can I use AI to be ethically and effectively used in the process of writing and publishing literature?
Yeah, so interesting one, right? So there are tools available. So even before tools, I can tell you, right? So when I was writing my thesis, uh, a couple of my friends said, there are these people who you just outsource your thesis work to. They will do all the research for you. They probably like AI at that time, but humans who would go and research for you, they will charge you a fee and they will write a thesis for you, right? I was like, how is that even possible, right? Meaning the whole idea is for you to understand what you're writing. The same thing comes with AI. See, it's a tool. It is same like internet, right? A few years ago, people would have said there was no internet. I used to go and read all of my books in the library and read through it and then write my thesis. Nowadays, people say, I've done it on Google. Google has a lot of research papers. I've gone into it. Now, I think the next breed of researchers are going to say, I've used AI to use the tool. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. For you to ethically use it is important, right? So I think like when people were using Google at that time, there were these plagiarism tools. Like you could yourself as a researcher send your papers through that tool, and it will kind of list down similarity, right? Meaning this particular paragraph or this line is similar to a similar paper somewhere else. So you could kind of test it out. Maybe you've thought about the same thing and you've written it down. AI will also come up with some of these tools where you can kind of compare against these tools. But I think it's about ethically using it for literature review. I don't think there is any harm because AI will synthesize information much more than what you yourself can synthesize. See, it's all about the objective. When you write a research paper, do a literature review, you want to get to a certain outcome. Is that more important, or is that you leave a bunch of articles and then you write something and say I've not used AI? So what is more important? The output is critical, right? Is the output right or wrong? So I look at it more from an output perspective. You use it ethically, I don't think there's an issue in using tools like this, and there are more tools coming out, right? So what they're doing is simply looking at those articles and giving you a summary. And you could then go ahead, still have to read the article, right? You can't just, I think that will be unethical for you to just simply copy and paste what AI has given you. You still have to go and read the article, the one that you feel is important, because when we were writing our papers, we kind of scored through maybe a few thousand and then read some abstracts for a few thousand, and then maybe 50 or 60 will go and read the full text article, right? So that's what you need to do every with AI tools too.
Yes, and we have one last question. Can the inclusion of AI in the clinical trials lead to potential bias of the generation of results, and how can XAI address this potential bias?
Yes. So there is definitely a chance of bias if the models are not built properly, right? So the bias can happen at any level. That could be inclusion of the patients, meaning where the patients are coming from. It could be heavily biased towards a certain region, for example, where the models were really trained. So it could maybe just kind of look at within that demography and then provide you with clinical trial patients. It could also have bias in terms of how the data is analyzed. So if, say, it's like this, if I have only read a certain number of books, I'll try to analyze everything only using those books, right? Because I have no other knowledge. The same thing happens with the AI model. So the whole thing comes down to how those models were initially created. So if you have a good model which have already taken into consideration all the factors, then the chances of bias are low. I wouldn't say it is eliminated, because as humans, we also have bias in the way how we do things, right? Machines also carry those bias because we as humans train them. So you need to be careful. There will still be bias. You just need to, as humans, need to review it carefully and ensure that you have taken care of those proactively. Explainable AI can definitely help. So there's governance mechanisms in terms of what data has been used, and they ensure that evaluations are performed, right? So there are evaluations now available to track how these models are grounded, how much factual they are. Does it even make sense, to be in kind of a simple words, right? Meaning some of these things. So the governance includes that. So if you're using any tools, if any provider comes to you and tells, hey, you should use this tool, I would say you should always ask some of these things and be sure that they are doing all of these things before you start using any of their tools.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for your wonderful insights, sir. So
Thanks,
thank you
Roshan.
for sharing your expertise and valuable perspectives with us today, and it was truly a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you once again, sir.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Roshan.
Pranab, for the
Thanks,
wonderful
Rachel.
session. Thank
No
you.
worries. Thanks.
Thank you.
So as we move forward, it's my pleasure to introduce one more distinguished speaker for today's session, Mr. Vipul Gupta, Group Manager, Data Science, Market Access and Pricing